The question at this time has to do with where our languages, where our races have come from. You know, whenever you look back in time, we see that God created Adam and Eve, Genesis chapter 2. We find there that because, from that first pair, Adam and Eve, has come all the races and all of humanity. And someone says, well, where'd all the races come from then? If we came from the same two, then how do you have different races, different languages, and those types of things? Well, that's a good question. How did that come about? How is that possible? Well, if you go back to the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, you're going to read about the beginning of a lot of things. You're going to read about the beginning of this earth and the universe. You're going to read about the beginning of animals and of the sea creatures and of land creatures and the beginning of man and all. The beginning of time, the beginning of all of this is found in the book of Genesis. But also here is found the beginning of races and languages and that type of thing as well. If you go back to Genesis chapter 6 through 8, you're going to read about the flood there at that time. How that the flood, God sent a flood that covered the entire world. It all died except those that were on the ark. Once they came off the ark, Noah and his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. These folks then began to repopulate the earth. And Shem's family would become what's known as the Jewish race, the Semitic race. You've heard about the Semitic race, Semites and that kind of thing. They came from Shem. You talk about those from Japheth. Japheth became the father, you might say, the beginning of what would become the Europeans and all up in that area. Ham and his race would go down toward Africa and go over in other directions, in fact toward the east and what have you. Now I realize that's painted with a broad brush, but that's generally the way those families migrated after the flood. Specifically, you're going to see how in Genesis chapter 11, how that for a time the whole earth was one language, one speech. Now I don't know what the language was. No one knows really what the language was. It wasn't Hebrew, wasn't any of that. But it was their own language, and all people obviously spoke the same language. And they decided that, you know, we know God said to go and spread out and to populate the whole world and all of that, but we really don't want to do that. We want to have some situation set up here to where we will not get so far spread out we can't be around one another again. And so what they did was they intended to make what's called the Tower of Babel. They made the tower, you remember. God, and read Genesis 11 and you'll read about this, that God then came, and because of their intention to make this tower, and God said these people are one language, and He said basically if we're not careful there'll be nothing that will be held back from them. So God, through miraculous means, confused or confounded the languages of the people. So they left off the building because they couldn't communicate with one another anymore. They spoke all different languages. And that confused, or that Babel at that time, that's why you have the Tower of Babel. That's why you have that place. It's because that was the scene or the place where God confused all the languages. And once they left off the building, the Bible says in Genesis chapter 11, that God scattered them upon the face of all the earth, and they left off, it says, to build the city. And so then that's why it was called Babel, verse 9 of Genesis 11, because God confounded the language, and He scattered them abroad upon all the face of the earth. So where did the languages come from, and the various peoples and all of that come from? They came from Genesis, and there at this time in Genesis chapter 11, it is explained to us very clearly. And so from this gave rise to the various languages we know today, and the dialects and all of that came from this time period where God scattered the people because of their sin, because of their ungodly behavior, because of their rebellion. God scattered them and sent them abroad. And thus we have the languages that we have today upon this earth.